I think that I have noticed a pattern, and I want to see if you've noticed it too. So the other day I was thinking about all these studies that have shown a rise in narcissistic traits across generations, right? The boomer generations were really high in those grandiose narcissistic traits that we associate with grandiose narcissism. But millennials, Gen X, Gen Zers, and probably to some extent even Gen Alpha, as we'll see, have different narcissistic traits. The traits have kind of morphed into something a bit more covert. Now, when societies become more narcissistic, what you see is hyper-individualism, which is me. It's all about the self, personalizing everything in the environment, seeing everything as a reflection of you and only caring about you and your very small little world, right? That's hyper-individualism. So Western societies like the US and even the UK have moved towards this more hyper-individualized kind of way of being, right? Which really messes up our social patterns and our political systems and our economic systems because everyone's just out for themselves and shit gets twisted. The pattern that I think I've noticed within this is a giant shift in the music industry, but more specifically our musical tastes and what we celebrate. I think that as we move towards a more hyper-individualized, narcissistic kind of culture and society in the West, we are now seeing the popularity, the centering of the individual star, the pop star, that singular one superstar on the stage. I think people are moving away from bands, which were kind of a communion, right? If you were someone who goes to a lot of rock shows, you know that that's a communion type of situation. You're interacting with a lot of different people. I think we're moving away from that and moving towards that kind of worship of one singular individual on the stage because of our move towards a more narcissistic, hyper-individualized society. Now, don't get me wrong. When I was growing up, there were still pop celebrities, right? Celine Dion, Whitney Houston, on and on and on. You had your big singular greats, but they were favored by a certain generation. When it came to the younger generation, the quote unquote at that time current generation, like millennials, it was all about the bands. And it was very similar for Gen X, who also grew up in that culture of bands. The bands were bigger than these individuals. The bands had more followers. They had more engagement across the music industry than just one single solo individual, right? They had a super broad reach, and it was kind of the age of bands. But now it's Taylor Swift. It's Beyonce, it's Lizzo. More and more, the biggest acts in the world, so many of them, is that single celebrity, that superstar, that individual who gets worshipped on the stage versus a band who joins in communion with their audience. And I think that's because as people become more covertly narcissistic, they are quietly personalizing everything and they centralize these individuals. They enjoy these individuals. They want to worship these individuals because they are personalizing themselves. They see themselves in that superstar. They want that for themselves, so they worship that thing to try to bring it to themselves. But really what they're doing in so many of these cases, so many of them, not all, is throwing laurels at the feet of narcissistic people who don't care about them. And we've seen these worshipped individuals turning on the people that work for them, on their fans who made them and built them. Which again begs the question, are narcissistic people being attracted by the narcissistic people they see on stage? Is that why these toxic celebrities, these toxic music individual superstars keep doing so much damage? Because they keep getting lifted up by people who are increasingly narcissistic. I don't know. Have you noticed this pattern? Do you feel like that communion of bands has become more and more of a fringe element? Let's have a discussion. Let me know what you think in the comments if you've noticed these patterns and what you think about the rise in narcissistic traits in Western society, because it's happening.